Hey everyone, welcome to Cat Scratch Kitchen, the channel where we show you how to make your favorite dishes from scratch. In this video, we're going to take a look back at some of our best copycat recipes. Whether you want to recreate a classic salsa, a favorite chicken chain coleslaw, or a decadent dessert, we've got you covered. If you're looking for a specific copycat video, just head to the description where you can find timestamps for each video included there. For a printable recipe link, head to the original video down below. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this compilation of our most delicious and easy copycat recipes. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we post a new video. Sound good? Well, let's get started. We're going to start off in a large stock pot, putting 2 tablespoons of oil in and heating it up. Just vegetable oil, canola oil. And I have 1 pound of ground beef. We're going to put that in. We're also going to add 1 large chopped onion. I'm using red onions. You can use yellow onions if you prefer. And we're just going to stir that together until the beef browns. And then we'll start adding our other ingredients. Beef is broken up well. It's got a light sear on it. Don't have to worry about it being completely done because it's going to be cooking, simmering for a long time. I have 2 cloves of minced garlic. Let that cook for just about 30 seconds. Now I have 2 cups of water. Now I didn't have to drain my beef because it's really, really lean, but before this step, if you need to, before you add the garlic, go ahead and drain any excess fat off of your hamburger. I have 12 ounces of tomato paste, and I have 8 ounces of tomato sauce. For our spices, we have 1.5 tablespoons of chili powder, 2 tablespoons of cumin, and 2 teaspoons of salt. Stir that through well. Hi, I want to pop in for a second and just give a shout out to my beautiful and talented friend Sharon McIntosh. She made these fantastic aprons for me that you're going to see coming up in all of my videos. They're not only beautiful, but they're 2-sided. They're reversible, so I ended up with a lot of new aprons. Thanks again to Sharon. Now that it's reached the boiling point, we're going to turn it down to medium, and we're going to let it simmer uncovered until it's thick. And that's going to take about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And when that's done, we'll come back and I'll plate it up and show you how it looks.
A few moments later.
So it's been 2 hours, and I've gone back and stirred it every about 20 minutes or so. And remember, it looked like soup when we first started, but take a look at it now. Okay, so we've got our hot dog. Let's take some of our Coney sauce. And remember, it's not a chili, it's actually a sauce. And now that's the original right there. But we can dress it up with a little bit of shredded cheese, or a lot of shredded cheese, some onions. Actually, however you would like. You could put your regular condiments, mustard, ketchup underneath. You could even go ahead and put something like some jalapenos on top if you want. But there you go. You've got your A&W Coney Dog. Okay, for the almond roca, we need a small pan, like an 8x8 pan or equivalent, or even a loaf pan. Line it with parchment paper and set it aside. On low heat, we're gonna melt a cup of butter, and this is unsalted butter, and 1/2 cup of white sugar. We're gonna let that melt until the sugar's totally dissolved. Now I'm gonna take 1/4 cup of our almonds that have been roughly chopped and just spread them over the bottom of our pan. Once this is melted, then we're going to stir it every once in a while until it starts to bubble. Now, you might need a candy thermometer, especially if you're not at sea level. If you're at sea level, you probably don't need one. When it comes to a boil, you're going to want to keep stirring it while it boils for 12 minutes, and that will be at hard crack stage. But now, if you're not at sea level, at altitude, water boils at a lower temperature. So what you want to do if you're above sea level is subtract 1 degree for every 500 feet above sea level, and then subtract that total amount from your final temperature. In our case, our final temperature is 300 degrees hard crack. I'm at just over 7,000 feet. So my temperature has to be reduced just over 14 degrees. So I need mine to be at 285.2. That will be my hard crack stage. It sounds really complicated, but it's not that hard to do. And once you have that number in your head that you have to subtract, you can apply it to everything. And especially with candy making, because if you overcook your candy, then it's going to be really hard. You won't have that nice crack that you want for the toffee. If it's undercooked, then you're going to have toffee that never sets up. It's going to be soft. And we're at 285, so that's where we needed to be. And you can see the sugar has colored now. It's a nice caramel color. We're going to keep stirring it, take it off the heat, and pour it on top of our almonds. Now we're going to let it set for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you want to put your chocolate chips over the top, then cover it with foil and let it sit for 5 more minutes. Okay, after the 5 minutes, you want to remove the foil and we want to just spread out the chocolate over the top. A spatula works best, a rubber spatula. And once you have it all smooth, then you want to take the rest of your crushed almonds and sprinkle them over the top. Now you just want to put it in the fridge for at least 2 hours or overnight. And then once it's set, you're going to take a sharp knife and cut it, basically break it into pieces, and you're all set with your almond roca. First thing we want to do is grease an 8x8 pan and turn on our oven to 350 degrees to preheat. Now, in a large bowl, we're going to add 2 cups of brown sugar and 10 tablespoons of melted butter. And we're going to blend these up and cream the sugar into the butter. Now add 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And 2 eggs. And whip it all together. Once it's all whipped together, and set it aside for a second. Get a medium-sized bowl. We're going to add 2 cups of flour. Mix up our dry ingredients. Then we have a teaspoon of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we're just going to whisk all that together so that it's well combined. Now this is the real technique for mixing up something like brownies or cakes, is mixing the wet ingredients and then adding the dry ingredients. But if you really want to and you mix it really well, there's no reason why you can't just do it all in one bowl. So now we want to add our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients and mix it together until it's all combined. Now, if you're using pecans, you would go ahead and add them now. And you want a cup and a half of white chocolate chips. Now, my chocolate chips are a little bit bigger, but they're flatter. But rather than chop them up, I'm just going to use them like this. I don't mind a larger bite of white chocolate. It's one of my favorites. And now just fold it all through. Once it's all folded through, we're just going to add it to the pan. And just push it around a little bit so it's even in the pan. Now it's ready to put in the oven. We're going to bake it for about 30 minutes. Now, while the blondies are baking, we'll go ahead and mix up the sauce. I've got 1/3 cup of butter that I've melted into a small saucepan. I've got a cup of granulated sugar, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 1/4 cup of real maple syrup, and 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Now we're just going to continue to heat this over medium heat until the sugar and the cream cheese are melted. I'm just going to take a whisk to it to get rid of the last little pieces of cream cheese. Now in the recipe you'll see when I put this all together, it calls for the addition of the chopped pecans, and of course I didn't add that here, but you can. Okay, our sauce is all set. Now we'll just wait for our blondies to come out of the oven and we'll be ready to serve. Today I'm going to share with you my all-time favorite pantry staple. It's so versatile, I can use it from breakfast all the way to dessert. That's a really good baking mix, an all-purpose baking mix, like Bisquick. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how easy and quick it is to put this together. It only takes a few ingredients. You need a really large bowl, and then also a large container to store it in afterwards. First, you'll need 10 cups of all-purpose flour. Now, the flour that I happen to be using has a small amount of baking powder in it, but it's not enough to make a difference in the baking mix itself. Next, it's 8 tablespoons of baking powder. 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar. 1 1/4 cups of powdered milk. Now you can see mine's kind of lumpy. Don't worry about that. We're going to be breaking it up when we mix it together. 1 tablespoon of salt and 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. Now grab a whisk or a spoon and stir all your ingredients together, making sure that they're well combined. And finally, we're going to add 2 1/4 cups of vegetable shortening. Now this is the fun part. Get your hands in there and start mixing together your shortening with your dry ingredients. It makes it easier as you're mixing to kind of press it through your palms to break up the shortening. It kind of rolls through your palms. It takes a bit of time, but it's really actually kind of relaxing. Keep running it through your hands, and eventually you're going to have fairly small lumps, not pea size, maybe quarter size. You want to be able to squeeze the mix together in your hand and have it hold its shape, just from the moistness of the shortening. Now just transfer the mix into your storage container, making sure it's large enough. This recipe makes about 17 cups of mix, so plan ahead. This will keep on your pantry shelf almost indefinitely. I've had it for well into 6 months, but it very rarely lasts me longer than that. So now we have our mix all together. Let's go ahead and make something with it. How about a main dish impossible pie? Impossible pies have been around since the 70s, and they're still delicious. So let's make an impossible cheeseburger pie. With about a tablespoon of oil in a skillet, add 1 pound of ground beef. Break up your ground beef and add 3 to 4 slices of diced up bacon. With your magic knife, dice up 1 medium onion and add it to your skillet. That's about a cup of diced onion. Then add 1 teaspoon of salt and about a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. Now cook over medium-high heat till the ground beef and bacon are cooked through and the onion has turned translucent. My ground beef was very lean and had very little grease. If your ground beef is a little fatter and you have grease in the bottom of your pan, just drain it off when it's completed cooking. Now in a small bowl, you're going to need 1/3 cup of your baking mix and 2 eggs, without the shell if possible. Now if you see that small speck in the egg, don't worry about it. If you're using farm fresh eggs, you see it quite often. It's a natural byproduct from the chicken and won't harm you at all. Now 1 cup of milk, and then whisk it all together until most of the lumps are gone. It's a fairly thin mixture. You're going to need a 9-inch pie plate that's been greased or oiled. Now take your cooked beef, bacon, and onion mixture and pour it into the bottom of your pie plate. Spread it around until it's fairly even. Now top the beef with 1 cup of shredded cheddar or any other cheese that you would prefer, making sure that you spread it evenly over the entire surface. And finally, take your mixture of your baking mix, egg, and milk and pour it as evenly as possible over the top of your entire pie. Don't worry if it looks like it's not totally covered. It'll even itself out as it bakes. Then just put it in a preheated 400-degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes. When it's done, a toothpick or a knife, when inserted in the middle, should come out clean. And there you go. We sprinkled a few diced dill pickles over the top just to increase that cheeseburger feel. We're going to whip this up in a blender. I'm going to use my little personal blender because it's just about the right size and I don't have to pull out my big blender. But you can also whip it up by hand, no problem. I'm going to show you the ingredients now and show you how fast it is to put together. First, we're going to start with ketchup. Now the measurements for all the ingredients are going to be in the recipe in the description box. So if I don't mention them here, don't worry, that's where you can find them. Then we need some sugar, just plain white granulated sugar. Some lemon juice, some red wine vinegar, try not to spill it everywhere, some Worcestershire sauce, and then our spices. I have salt, ground mustard, paprika, turmeric, and cayenne. And the last thing we need is some canola oil. Now you can see that's all your basic ingredients. Now we're just going to blend it up so that it's well emulsified. I'm going to shake it just a little bit, get all of that ketchup that's at the bottom, and give it one more spin. And there you have it, all in 10 minutes or less. We're going to start with Cavender's Greek seasoning. Now this seasoning blend is a combination of some of the classic herbs and spices used in Greek cuisine, like dill, garlic, basil, oregano, and thyme, as well as a few others. Now, Cavender's tagline is to use it just like you would salt and pepper. So obviously, they consider it an all-purpose seasoning. And you can use it the same on meats, on salads, in sauces, your choice. Let's get started. Start with 4 teaspoons of salt, 4 teaspoons of basil, 4 teaspoons of oregano, a teaspoon of thyme, 4 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of dill, 2 teaspoons of marjoram, 2 teaspoons of cornstarch, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, 2 teaspoons of parsley flakes, 2 teaspoons of rosemary, 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg. You just want to mix it all together. I use a small whisk, keep it in an airtight container, and it should last for up to a year. Now we're going to move on to the Montreal steak seasoning. That's probably one of the best known seasoning blends out there, and everybody loves the flavor, especially the beef lovers out there. When we put this together, it's so few ingredients and takes less than 5 minutes, and you've got it ready whenever you want to. One of the key ingredients to me in this is the smoked paprika. Let's get started. 2 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of smoked paprika. It does need to be smoked. 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of crushed black pepper, 1 tablespoon of red pepper flakes, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, and 2 teaspoons of dill seed. Stir all the ingredients together and store them in an airtight jar. This will also last about a year. So there you go, 2 classic seasoning blends that are wonderful to have on hand in your cabinet. Both of them make about a half a cup. Of course, you can double, triple, quadruple so that you have as much as you need. Half a cup will really last you quite a while. A little less on the steak blend. But you don't want to get too much of it ahead unless you're going to be using a whole lot of it, because you don't want it to get to the point where it has no flavor anymore. They'll keep airtight in your cabinet for a good year, but after that, you probably want to replace it because it'll get kind of stale. Using canned chicken, you won't believe how fast this recipe comes together. I have 2 cups of canned chicken. For me, that's about 3 small cans that I've drained. We're just going to throw them in the food processor. I have some spices. I have a half teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and 2 teaspoons of celery flakes. I have 1/3 cup of sweet pickle relish. If you don't want quite as much relish, you can use a 1/4 cup. 2/3 cup of mayonnaise. 2 boiled eggs that I've just roughly chopped. And just a pinch of garlic powder. And we only need to pulse it maybe 2 or 3 times just until it's the consistency you want. Let's give it a check. That looks perfect. And see, that was just 4 little pulses. Now you can either dig in with a fork or let's make a sandwich. Okay, we're going to use some nice thick toasted wheat bread so that it's more reminiscent of Chick-fil-A. Just pile on our chicken salad. Add some fresh lettuce. And you've got enough for a crowd, or put it in the fridge and you can have it for several days. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, to start out with, we're going to need a total of 8 cups of chicken broth for this recipe. But to begin with, we're only going to use 2 of those cups. And we're going to mix it with 1 cup of masa harina. You can usually find that in your grocery in the Mexican section. We're going to put the harina in the broth and stir it until there's no lumps left. Then we can just set that aside. Now turn the heat on to a large pot and add 1/4 cup of vegetable oil and our spices. We have a teaspoon of ground cumin, a teaspoon of chili powder, 1 or 2 teaspoons of fresh minced garlic, I'm using 2, 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne, and 1/2 to a teaspoon of salt. I'm using a teaspoon. And 1 1/2 cups of diced onions. That's about 3 medium onions. And we're going to let this cook, stirring it every once in a while until the onions are soft and translucent. It'll take about 5 minutes. Now that the onions are soft and cooked through, we're going to take that masa harina mixture that we have and add it to the pot along with the onions and spices and bring it to a boil. Once it starts to bubble, you want to cook it for 2 to 3 minutes, stirring it all the time. You want to make sure you get all the lumps out. And that's going to also take away any raw taste that's there from the masa. Now we're going to stir in the remaining 6 cups of broth and 1 cup of crushed tomatoes. Let the soup return to a boil, stirring it every once in a while. Now that it's back to a boil, we're going to add cheese, and we're using 4 ounces of just processed American cheese that we've cut into small cubes. Add that to your soup and stir it until the cheese melts. It's going to take several minutes, but just be patient. Once the cheese is melted, or at least most of it is melted, we're going to add 1 1/2 pounds of diced cooked chicken, or shredded. It's about 3 medium to large sized chicken breasts. Or you can use 1 or 2 large cans of chicken breast chunks. Add that to the soup and just let it heat through. At that point, you're done. You've got dinner ready to go. You can top it with cilantro. You can top it with tortilla strips, sour cream, green onions, diced red onions, salsa or pico de gallo, all kinds of things. And you've got a wonderful, hearty, thick, delicious soup ready for your meal. We're going to start with a 16-ounce bag of frozen corn. You can use canned corn as well if you like. You're going to need 16 ounces. I've thawed it and let it drain well. And then I need about 2 tablespoons of lime juice. Quarter cup of cilantro. This has been chopped and then frozen. That's the reason it looks nice and dark like that. But the taste of it after it's frozen, although the color changes a little bit darker, it still tastes just like fresh. I have about 1/4 cup of diced red onion, about 1 cup of cherry tomatoes that I've halved, about 2 tablespoons of finely diced jalapeno. Now this is optional, but it does add to the flavor, make it that much better. And I have 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And I just want to stir it all together. Just want to make sure I get the salt and pepper fully dispersed. And believe it or not, that's it. You can use it as a side dish for any type of meal that you have. It's great to take along on a picnic. You can use it as a topping on tacos or burrito bowls. What I like to do is serve it with like a dip with some tortilla chips, and you're all set. So for our cobbler, we need 2 1/2 cups of fresh or frozen pineapple, cut up into chunks, add it to a saucepan. If you're using frozen pineapple, let it thaw first. and drain the majority of the juice off of it. Now to this, we're going to add 3 tablespoons of brown sugar and just stir it together. And we just want to heat it until the brown sugar completely dissolves. In the meantime, you want to make sure that your oven is preheated to 350 degrees. Okay, you can see the brown sugar is all melted. Now we're going to make a slurry out of 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of water. Add that to our pineapple, and we're going to continue to cook on medium-high heat until it thickens. Now, once our pineapple is nice and thick like this, then we're going to add it to an 8x8 pan. Just spread it out to cover the whole pan. And now we're just going to set it aside and we'll make the topping. So in a separate bowl for our topping, we need 1/2 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of plain white sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and 3 tablespoons of softened butter. Then we just want to cut it all together to make our crumb topping. You can use a pastry cutter, you can use a regular fork. I'm using a dough fork. You want to just keep cutting it together until it's about pea-sized pieces of butter. Okay, now we're going to take our pan of pineapple and we're just going to sprinkle this pretty evenly over the top. Now we're going to put it in our 350-degree oven for 45 minutes. Straight out of the oven, went ahead and dipped up a serving, some vanilla ice cream or some whipped topping on top, but it's just as good just as it is. Just a taste of the tropics. Okay, I'm going to mix up enough mix for 2 cakes, and of course you can decrease this by half to do only 1, or you can increase it to do even more. The cake, actually, it comes out as a yellow cake if left alone, but you can spice it up. You can make a spice cake, which is what I'm going to end up doing, or you can make a chocolate cake. I'll give you some additions to make those types. We need 5 cups of flour, and I need 3 cups of granulated sugar. Need 2 tablespoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup of shortening. Now you want to mix it all up at low speed with a hand mixer or stand mixer until it's all crumbly and well incorporated. And there you go, you have your yellow cake mix all set. Just need to divide it in half. It's about 4.5 cups for each cake mix, and you'd be all set for a yellow cake mix. Now I'm going to make spice cake. For each cake mix you would want a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. And I'm doubling that since I'm doing 2 cake mixes. And I'm just going to mix that through. Now what I like to do is resealable bag that I write the type of cake mix it is, when I made it, and then also what I need in addition for the cake, how long to cook it, and in what size pan. I'll add 4.5 cups to each bag. In the description, I'll give you the exact measurements for each cake mix to go ahead and mix it up and bake it, as well as the timing and the temperature. And if you end up having extra, then just evenly divide it between your bags. Part of that's going to depend on the humidity and the lightness of your flour. I ended up with about 5 cups per bag. There I have 2 spice cake mix ready to put in my pantry, all set to bake up. When it gets towards the holidays, they'll come in really handy. Okay, we're going to start out with some ground beef. Now all the measurements are going to be in the recipe below. We have some nice lean ground beef, and we also have some ground pork. And we want to mix them together, try and get all the pork and the beef pretty much evenly combined. Now we're going to add some dry breadcrumbs, some finely minced onion, some minced garlic, and 1 egg, and mix it all together. Now we're going to add some whole milk, some salt, and some ground pepper, and mix it all again. And that milk should soak in with all the breadcrumbs and make a nice cohesive mixture. Now I'm going to use a small scoop to make my meatballs and then place them on a plate. Now this meatball mixture is really soft. So now the recipe says to place the plate in the fridge for about 2 hours so they can firm up and hold together better when we fry them up. Okay, after our meatballs have rested in the fridge for a couple of hours, I have a little bit of oil in a large skillet and the heat is on medium-high. We're going to add our meatballs and brown them on all sides. Now you can take the time to make your meatballs nice and round and perfect. I didn't do that. Some of them are a little misshapen, but they still taste good. And I think we'll have to do this in 2 batches. Now you're probably going to get 35 to 40 meatballs, which is a lot. You can cut this in half, of course, if you want to make less, or this would work great if you're entertaining. Now once they're brown, we want to take them off and put them in a small baking dish or pan, and then we're going to cover them, put them in a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes. And while they're cooking, we'll go ahead and make the sauce. Now to make the sauce, we're going to use the same skillet we cooked the meatballs in. We're going to add just a little bit of canola oil, maybe a tablespoon. We're going to add some butter, have some all-purpose flour. You want to whisk it in, let it cook for about 2 minutes to get rid of the raw flour taste. Now we're going to add some beef stock, and you want to keep whisking it the whole time. You can use box stock or bouillon, that's what I'm using. And then we're going to add the same amount of vegetable stock. Once your flour is all incorporated, then we're going to add some heavy cream, 2 teaspoons of soy sauce, and 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard. Now we just want to bring it to a simmer, continuing to stir it until it thickens. You can see how nice and thick it is now. Now we'll just take our meatballs out of the oven and add them to our sauce, and we'll be ready to serve. And we'll just take our meatballs, add them to our sauce. Now you can serve your meatballs on mashed potatoes or small boiled red potatoes or noodles, your choice. And we're supposed to be just like Ikea's. So let me know what you think. Okay, to start out, we need 2/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour and 1/2 cup of cornmeal. I'm using yellow cornmeal because that's just typically what's in a Jiffy Mix. Then we have 3 tablespoons of plain white sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of baking powder. And believe it or not, that's it. For the mix itself, you don't need anything else. It's as cheap, if not cheaper, than buying the box mix, and takes you, less than 3 minutes to throw together. Just mix it up together, and that right there is the equivalent of 1 box of Jiffy Mix. Now you can double, triple, quadruple this recipe as much as you want. Once it's all mixed, I just label a Ziploc bag and pour it in there. And I know that each little sandwich-sized bag is 1 cup of 1 cup, 1 package or 1 box of Jiffy Mix. And it's ready for me sitting in the cupboard. Once you have your mix made up, then if you want to use it just for a muffin mix, just like it is out of the box, all you need to add is 2 tablespoons of either oil or butter, 1 beaten egg, and a half a cup of milk. And you can make either muffins, you can make a flat cornbread type in a square, about an 8 by 8 pan, just about anything you want. But you've also got the ability then to use it in recipes. There's a corn recipe that uses Jiffy Mix that's just fantastic, as well as snack recipes that use Jiffy Mix. But you've got yours ready to go, and you don't have to worry about running to the store and getting it. Hi, I'm Terry, and welcome to Cat Scratch Kitchen. Today, let's talk breakfast. I'm going to show you a seasoning mix that you can keep in your pantry, and with just 1 pound of ground pork, you can create a great breakfast sausage. Let's get started. For 1 pound of ground pork, we'll need 1 teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of dried parsley, a half a teaspoon of dried sage, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper, a 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme, a 1/4 teaspoon of dried red pepper flakes, a 1/4 teaspoon of cumin, 1/4 teaspoon of MSG. Now you don't have to use the MSG, but I do feel like it enhances the flavor. And lastly, just 1/8 of a teaspoon of cayenne, not for heat, just for flavor. And that's pretty simple, isn't it? Now you just want to whisk it all together so that it's well combined. Now you can store it in the pantry, or you can use it right away. So let's get our pound of pork and our seasoning mix and make some up. I will make up to 20 times the amount of the original recipe and store it in a container. Then I've got it ready whenever I want. You can see my jar looks like it has feet all of a sudden. Looks like Brody's waiting for his turn for some sausage. So to your pound of ground pork, you only need 3 teaspoons of your seasoning mix. Just sprinkle it across so that it's pretty much spread over the entire thing. Then you're just going to get your hands in there and start mashing it together. That's the easiest way to me. Of course you can use a spoon or a spatula, but easiest way for me is to put on a pair of gloves and just get in there with my fingers and make sure it's all mixed together well. Now this sausage is not only great for breakfast as patties or crumbled into milk gravy with biscuits, but it's also great crumbled up on top of pizza or even used in some casseroles in place of your ground beef. Now you're ready to use your sausage right away. Just shape it into patties, put it in your skillet and fry it up. I like to mix it up at least a day in advance so that it can sit in the fridge and all the spices can meld with the meat. It tastes a lot better to me. To store the sausage, take a sheet of plastic wrap, put your sausage in the center, fold the sides over the top of the sausage, and then kind of roll it along the counter to get the shape you want. Then take the 2 ends, twist the entire thing so that it's sealed up tight on the ends. Then you're going to take those 2 end pieces, fold them under the sausage, and set the sausage on top of them, just to make sure everything is secured and sealed. Now I like to make 2 or 3 pounds at a time, wrap each 1 pound portion, and store them in the freezer. When I want to have sausage the next day, just take it out of the freezer and leave it in the fridge overnight. Then the next morning, I slice it and fry it up. Doesn't that look good? It does to Brody. Okay, in your stand mixer or with a hand mixer, We're going to need 1 cup of butter that's softened. Now whip it up until it's creamed. It only should take you about 30 seconds. Now we're going to add 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. And for our powdered sugar and our flour, we want to make sure that we sift it when we put it in, because we want to make sure that we have a smooth and even texture in our cookies. Then we need a tablespoon of whole milk and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Now we're going to beat it together until it's light and fluffy. Take a second if you need to scrape it down. Now we're going to add our flour, and once again, we want to make sure we sift it. Now we want to mix it at the lowest speed, just so that everything is combined. Now we're going to stir in 1 cup of chopped pecans. Once it's all thoroughly mixed, we want to set it in the fridge for about 30 minutes because we want to make sure that our cookies don't spread. Plus the chilling makes it easier to shape them when we're ready to go. Now that our cookie dough has chilled, we want to go ahead and preheat your oven to 325, and we'll get started rolling our cookie dough. We need about 1-inch balls, and you want to place them about 2 inches apart. Now we want to sift another 1/4 cup of powdered sugar into a small bowl or even a plate. And we want to take a flat surface, either a measuring cup like I'm using, or the bottom of a glass, dip it into your powdered sugar, make sure the excess is off, and press down your cookies. Now they're ready to put in the oven for about 13 to 15 minutes. You want to keep an eye on them because you only want to cook them until it just starts to turn brown around the edges. When they come out, they're nice and light, just barely golden, and they have a really crisp, tender texture. With hot coffee, tea, or a glass of milk, they're the perfect accompaniment. Okay, these are the vegetables that we need for our coleslaw, just cabbage, carrots, and a little bit of onion. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut up the cabbage so that it's in a manageable size. I'm going to be using my food processor to chop it all up, and that's going to give you the best consistency to be like KFC coleslaw, which is really fine. You can do it by hand with a regular grater, but it's going to take you a lot more time and a lot more effort. So let's just get this down into manageable sizes to go into the feed tube. All right, going to start feeding through our cabbage. Now I'm going to feed through the onion as well. And now I'll start feeding through the carrots. Oops. And all the measurements are going to be down in the recipe below the like button. You can see this is going to make a big batch of coleslaw. So for your next barbecue, 4th of July, any kind of gathering, perfect recipe to have on hand. Plus, it keeps really well in the refrigerator, so even if you have a big batch, you can always use it up. Once our veggies are cut up, We're going to mix up the dressing now. We've got mayonnaise, regular granulated sugar, whole milk, buttermilk, fresh lemon juice, some apple cider vinegar, and salt and pepper. And we just want to whisk it all together until it's smooth. Now we need a large mixing bowl, and we're going to put in all our veggies. And you can see how fine the texture is, which is exactly what you'll see with KFC. Now we want to pour over our dressing. Make sure you scrape it out well, because any sugar that might be settled at the bottom you're going to need in the recipe. Now we're going to stir it all together. Make sure your veggies are all well combined, your carrots are interspersed all the way through, and everything is moistened. Now you might want to taste it just to make sure you've got enough salt. At this point, you want to put it in a covered container or cover this with saran wrap and set it in your fridge for at least 2 hours up to overnight, just so that all the flavors can meld well. Then you're ready to serve whenever. You'll need to dice up a ½ cup of onion and add it into a skillet with 2 pounds of ground beef. Also, ½ cup of diced green pepper. Now just cook the ground beef, peppers, and onions over medium-high heat until the ground beef is browned and the onions and peppers have softened. This takes maybe 5 minutes, and as it cooks, make sure you go ahead and just break up your ground beef so that you have smaller pieces. Sort of like taco meat, you don't want big chunks. Once your ground beef is cooked, you want to add 1½ cups of ketchup. Add it to the ground beef in your skillet and stir it thoroughly. You want to make sure that ketchup coats everything. Now we're ready for the seasonings. Your seasonings are 6 teaspoons of brown sugar, 2 teaspoons of yellow mustard, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper. Just throw those in the pan with your ketchup and ground beef. Now you want to stir it together so that your seasonings, your beef, your ketchup, everything in that pan is totally combined. All you do now is reduce the heat, put a lid on your pan, and let it simmer for 25 to 30 minutes. Go back every once in a while and stir it, just to make sure it doesn't burn on the bottom. And there you have it. In less than 25 minutes, you've got a meal that everybody is going to love. A nice toasted bun and a heaping pile of Manwich Sloppy Joe mix, and everyone's going to be happy. Now, like I said at the beginning, this is a double recipe. The recipe that's listed below is for a single meal. But if you make it double like I did, you'll have one meal for tonight and another meal that you can store in a Ziploc bag and store in your freezer. Then when you want a quick lunch or dinner, you've got it all set in your freezer. Add some buns and you're ready to go. You can reheat it from frozen in the microwave or in a skillet, and it's just as good as when it was fresh. This is one of those meals that we come back to over and over, not only because it's easy, but it tastes delicious. Okay, for our chili seasoning, just need a few ingredients. We need 1/4 cup of chili powder. We need a tablespoon of paprika. We need a tablespoon of cumin. We need 2 teaspoons of onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of cayenne. Now, if you like hotter chili, you can always add more cayenne. 4 teaspoons of salt, and we need 2 teaspoons of ground black pepper. Now we just need to mix it all together. When mixed, 2 tablespoons of this is the perfect seasoning for your chili. Now at the end of the recipe, I'll give you some measurements and some ingredients for a typical chili, one that I would use using this spice mix. And then you can just store it in a little jar or a Ziploc bag. Anytime you're ready for a nice, comforting bowl of chili, you'll have your seasonings all set to go. And you can keep your seasoning for up to 6 months. Okay, for our meatloaf seasoning, really simple. We need 2 teaspoons of dry mustard. I'm going to mix up enough just for 1 meatloaf. You can multiply it and store it in a jar for up to 6 months if you want to make more at one time. I need 2 teaspoons of paprika, 1 teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of dried thyme, and I like to kind of run it through my palms just to break it up a little bit. 1½ teaspoons of basil, a teaspoon of ground black pepper, a teaspoon of garlic powder, not garlic salt, and a teaspoon of onion powder. Now, if you just want to make one batch at a time, you can put it in a Ziploc bag and store it in the cabinet. Or like I said, you can multiply this recipe and store it in a jar or a larger Ziploc bag. Also, at the end of the recipe, I'll give you the measurements for a typical meatloaf that you would use this mix in. And this amount that you're seeing right now is the amount that you would use for 1 recipe of meatloaf. Be nice and juicy and flavorful. So now Old Bay is a spice blend that's branded and used generally as a seafood spice in crab boils, shrimp boils, things like that, especially shellfish. Do you know that you can use Old Bay in all kinds of applications? It's delicious on boiled corn, just sprinkled on top, on popcorn even, or on roasted vegetables. You want to put roasted vegetables in a sheet pan or in your air fryer and just sprinkle a little of the Old Bay on top. It adds a terrific flavor. There's just so many ways you can use this seasoning blend. Don't think of it as only for seafood. And if you can't get it in your area, this is a way to make it for yourself so that you have something almost exactly the same. So let's get started. The first thing you need is bay leaves. Now, if you can find bay leaf powder, perfect. If not, need about 10 bay leaves, spice grinder or coffee grinder, or a small food processor, and make your own powder. That's what I've done here. A tablespoon of celery salt, 1½ teaspoons of dry mustard, a teaspoon of ground black pepper, a teaspoon of ginger, a teaspoon of smoked paprika, half a teaspoon of white pepper, half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, half a teaspoon of cloves, which we're going to replace with a half a teaspoon of allspice, and then a half a teaspoon of regular ground allspice. So you're looking at a total of a teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, half a teaspoon of mace if you have it, otherwise substitute nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom. If you don't happen to have cardamom, you can substitute 1/8 teaspoon of cinnamon and 1/8 teaspoon of cloves if you have it, and 1/8 teaspoon of cinnamon. Now we're going to put it on our spice grinder and we'll grind it up until it's totally smooth, totally combined. Now once it's combined, we're going to store it in a jar or some sort of a spice canister that you have that's airtight, and you're all set. You have your own clone of Old Bay seafood seasoning. I have 1 tablespoon of oil in my pot. We're going to allow it to heat up, and then we're going to add 1 pound of the mild Italian sausage like we made last week. The link for that is below the like button, or you could also use a pound of ground beef if that's what you have. We're going to heat this over medium heat and crumble up the sausage and cook it until it's no longer pink. If any fat has come off of your meat, you want to drain that now. Mine is very lean, so there's no additional fat here. We're going to add an additional tablespoon of oil. Now add your onions, your carrots, and your celery. Now on the carrots and celery, these are ones that I had chopped and ready to go in my freezer. We're going to saute all of this together about 5 minutes until the vegetables start to become tender. Now add the broth. I'm using beef bouillon, so I have beef bouillon and water. The tomato sauce, the additional water, your canned tomatoes, sugar, basil, oregano, thyme, marjoram, and pepper. Now's the time to taste and add any additional salt if you think you need it. My batch doesn't need any additional salt, more than likely because I used the beef bouillon. Now you want to bring it to a boil, reduce the heat to a simmer, and cover it for 15 to 20 minutes. Now that it's simmered for about 15 minutes, I'm going to add 2 cans of beans, 15-ounce can of kidney beans, and 1 of white beans. You can use cannelloni beans, Great Northerns, navy beans, your choice. And also, we're going to add our pasta. We're going to cover it again and cook it for another 10 to 14 minutes or until the pasta is tender. It's been about 14 minutes and our pasta is tender. We don't need to add any more broth or water. If it looks too thick to you, you can also add that at this point. And it's ready to serve up. Top it with a little finely grated Parmesan or Romano cheese, and you're ready to eat. Okay, first we need a small saucepan. I have 1 cup of water in here. We need another cup of water, a 6-ounce can of tomato paste. If I forget to tell you the measurements on something, don't worry, it's all in the recipe in the description box. Then we need 1/3 cup of chopped onions, 1/4 cup of pretty finely chopped jalapenos, including the seeds. Now this takes, depending on the size of your jalapenos, probably 3 to 4 jalapenos. We need 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And then we have a 1/2 teaspoon of minced garlic. You can use fresh or jarred. We have a rounded 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of dried minced onions. Now you just want to whisk it all together. And we want to heat this over medium-high heat until it reaches a boil. Once it comes to a boil, then we're going to reduce the heat just to medium or medium-low and simmer it for 30 minutes or until it starts to thicken. You can enjoy this sauce right away or store it in an airtight container in the refrigerator for up to a week. You can also freeze it for longer storage. This sauce is great for nachos, tacos, burritos, enchiladas, quesadillas, and more. You can also use it as a marinade, a dressing, or a dip for chips, veggies, or it's great as a topping for chicken. We're going to start out with I've got just over a pound of breast chicken. Now Panda Express uses chicken thighs, but actually the breast of chicken, although the thighs are really good, the breast of chicken will make it just a little bit healthier for us. They're cut into bite-sized pieces. We're going to add 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. And then just toss it together so that all the chicken is coated. Okay, we're going to add our chicken to our skillet. It's on medium-high heat. And we're going to let it cook on each side for about 3 or 4 minutes. It's been cooked on all sides. Now we're going to remove the chicken for a bit, put the pan back on the heat, and now we're going to start sauteing the vegetables. Skillet on medium-high heat, we're going to put a tablespoon of canola oil and a tablespoon of sesame oil. Now I've got about 8 ounces of sliced mushrooms and 2 small zucchinis that I've sliced in half lengthways and then down the middle to make just half moon sizes. And they're about 1/2 inch wide. I'm going to add that as well. Now we're going to cook these just until they start to brown a little bit in the oil. Try and stir them around a little bit so that they all get some of the oils on them. And your heat should be at high now. And now we're going to add, if you have fresh
ginger
or
ginger
paste, you can use 2 teaspoons. I don't happen to have that, but I do have ground
ginger,
which is fine, and you use 1/2 teaspoon of ground
ginger.
I also have 3 minced garlic cloves, and we're going to stir those around a little bit for about 30 seconds till it starts getting aromatic. You don't want to go much longer than that or your garlic will start to burn. Now, we take our chicken that we set aside, add it back to the skillet, stir it all together till it's well coated. And then we're going to cook it for 2 or 3 minutes just to allow the veggies to soften a little bit more. Okay, now we're going to add a tablespoon of rice wine vinegar, 2 teaspoons of sugar, and 1/4 cup of soy sauce. I'm using a low sodium soy sauce here. Now we're going to stir it all together, let it warm up well, and it'll be ready to serve. I've got 5 cups of quick oats. I'm going to take 1.5 cups of that, add it to a blender or food processor, and we're going to blend it down until it's a powder. Now we're going to just add it back to our bowl of oats and mix in the rest of our ingredients. Now we're going to add 1/2 to 1 cup of brown sugar. A lot of it just depends on how sweet you want your brown sugar. Depends on how sweet you want your oatmeal. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. And we're just going to stir it all together. And that's your basis for instant oatmeal right there, nothing more. Now you can put this in a canister as is and take it out 1/2 cup to 3/4 cup at a time that you want to use it, or you can put it in individual snack size or sandwich size Ziploc bags and store it that way. That way you can have different flavors so that you can pick and choose. I'll show you some of the different flavor options. Okay, here are some of our favorites. Take 1/2 cup of our basic mixture and add a couple of tablespoons of mini chocolate chips, or 3 tablespoons of raisins and 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon for cinnamon raisin. Or one of my favorites, a couple of crushed Oreos and a tablespoon of powdered coffee creamer for cookies and cream. And I'll give you a couple other combinations in the recipe. You can absolutely go wild with this. Just let your imagination go. For each package, you're going to need a microwave-safe bowl and 3/4 cup of water. Stir it together and microwave for 1.5 to 2 minutes. Take it out of the microwave, stir it, and then let it set for another minute so that it thickens, and you're ready to go. First, you're going to need 2 cups of plain white rice. To that, you're going to add 1 cup of fideo. Now, fideo is a thin, short pasta, similar to the noodles that you find in a dried noodle soup. For the flavoring, we need 1/4 cup of dried parsley, 5 tablespoons of chicken bouillon, or you can use beef if you prefer, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme. We want to pour this in the bowl with our rice and our pasta and mix it together thoroughly. You know, my local store today did not have fideo, and if that happens to you, It's an easy remedy. Just buy a package of angel hair pasta and break it into half-inch pieces. Now that sounds sort of labor intensive, but I just sat in front of the TV and broke it into a bowl. A pound of angel hair pasta makes about 3 cups of broken pasta, so way more than you would need for this recipe. The rest of it I'll keep on hand, mix with broth, and have a nice light lunch. You can store it in any container or Ziploc bag as long as it's airtight. It'll keep almost indefinitely. This recipe will make the equivalent of 4 boxes of rice-a-roni and comes out to merely 60 cents a box. That's not bad. Now, to use our rice-a-roni mix, we need 2 tablespoons of butter melted in a 12-inch skillet. To that, we're going to add 1 cup of our rice mixture. Stir it well to make sure that all the rice and pasta is covered in the butter. You're going to let it stay on the stove over medium-low heat until the pasta starts to turn golden brown. It'll take you maybe 3-4 minutes. Once your pasta starts to turn the golden brown, you're going to add 2 1/4 cups of water to your skillet. With the temperature at medium-high, stir together the water and pasta and bring it to a boil. Once your rice comes to a good boil, you're going to cover it with a lid and leave it to simmer for 15 minutes. After that 15 minutes, all of the liquid should be absorbed. You can fluff it with a fork and it's ready to serve. Okay, over medium heat, I've got canola oil. I'll give you the measurements in the recipe below. I've got flour. Once this heats up, I'm going to add flour and chili powder. Okay, we're going to add our flour and chili powder to our oil and whisk it together. Now we're going to reduce the heat a little bit and just continue until the flour is well browned. Then we're going to pour in our chicken broth. Mine is just chicken bouillon mixed with water, and whisk it in as well. Stir it in. Pour in our tomato sauce. And now we want to add our spices. We've got cumin, garlic powder, onion powder, and salt. And whisk those in as well. Once it's nice and smooth, we're going to let it simmer over medium heat for about 10 to 12 minutes until it starts to thicken just a little bit.
A few moments later.
Okay, it's been simmering for about 10 minutes, and you can see it's thickened just a little bit. And now it's ready for you to use. You can use it immediately in any dish that you're putting together that requires enchilada sauce, or if you want, you can store it in the fridge for up to 3 days. I like to put it in a jar just because it's easier to handle, and stick it in the fridge. Makes about 3 cups worth. You can make it in smaller jars, put it in smaller jars, a cup apiece. You could even, if you wanted to, freeze it in either the super blocks or some sort of ice cube trays or something like that, and keep it in the freezer for a longer period of time. But generally, when I have it, it's when I need it. So it's up to you how you want to keep it. If you want to keep it longer than 3 days, you can definitely freeze it. Traditional magic shell, you only need 2 ingredients, chocolate chips and coconut oil. For this, we need a cup of chocolate chips and 3 tablespoons of coconut oil that's measured while it's solid. It's warm in here, so this is starting to liquefy. Now we just need to head to the microwave, and you're going to microwave it in 20 to 30 second increments until it's nice, melted, and smooth. Once it comes out of the microwave, it's going to be nice and smooth. You're going to let it set for just a couple of minutes, and then you can pour it on your ice cream and watch the magic happen. You can store this in a jar with a lid at room temperature. If it starts to seize up a little bit on you and harden in the jar, you can always heat it up and get it right back to normal. Now we'll make the peanut butter version. For the peanut butter version, we're going to add one more ingredient. We need a half a cup of creamy peanut butter, a quarter cup of coconut oil, measured while it's solid, and we're going to do this the same way we did the chocolate, 20 or 30-second increments until it's nice and smooth. When it comes out, we'll whisk in a quarter of a cup of confectioner sugar until it's smooth, and it'll be ready to go. Once it's all melted and smooth, then we're going to add
1/4 of a cup
of confectioner sugar, and we want to whisk it through until it's smooth again. Get rid of all the lumps. And there you go. Once again, you want to let it sit and cool for a little bit, and then you can put it on your ice cream. Put it on some chocolate ice cream for a Reese's ice cream sundae. Sounds good. Okay, the first thing you want to do is preheat your oven to 350 and then prepare a pan, 8 by 8 or equivalent pan with parchment paper, and just set it aside until we're ready for it. Then we need melted butter, and to the melted butter we're going to add some brown sugar, some granulated sugar, 2 large eggs, and our vanilla. And then take your mixer and mix it until well blended. Now to this mixture, we're going to add flour, just regular all-purpose flour, salt, baking powder, cinnamon, and ginger. Now we're going to mix it again just until it's combined. You want to go just until it's combined because just like muffins, if you go too far, it's going to make it tough. Now we need 3/4 of a cup of our white chocolate chips. I have larger chips, so I chopped them so that they're a little bit smaller. And dried sweetened cranberries. Now I'm just going to mix this by hand, and we're going to pour it in our prepared dish. Now we're going to put it in the oven for 20 to 22 minutes, just until the center is set. Okay, now that they have cooled, we're going to take them out of the pan, set them aside. We're going to mix up the cream cheese icing. So I've already started mixing the cream cheese. Want it nice and smooth. Now we're just going to slowly add our powdered sugar, just a little at a time. You can ice it on a rack or on a plate. I'm just going to do it on the parchment that I took it out of. And while it's moist, I'm going to sprinkle on some dried sweetened cranberries. Then I have some white chocolate chips that I've melted in the microwave. And I'm going to take a fork and just drizzle the white chocolate over the top. All you need to do now is let it set for a minute until the icing sets, and then we're going to cut it in triangles, put it on a plate, and you're ready to go. Now to put this together, you probably have all of the ingredients right in your cupboard. Look for day-old bread at your grocery or the heels from loaves of bread that your family won't eat. Save those in the freezer until you're ready to put this together. Even leftover garlic bread or cornbread works great in this. I have some bakery bread that I cut into cubes, measured out 6 cups worth, and then stuck it in the oven and toasted it so it's nice and crispy now. We're going to start with that. I did cut the bread up into slices and let it sit overnight so it got a little bit stale first. Now we're just going to put in the seasonings that are going to make this your stovetop stuffing. We need 1 tablespoon of parsley. And I'm using dried parsley. We need 1.5 tablespoons of a powdered chicken bouillon or bouillon cubes that you've run through your blender or your food processor to turn into powder. Need 1/3 cup of dry minced onions and 1/3 cup of dried celery flakes. Now these I make myself because just the tops that are left on my celery, I dry them out in my microwave and then crumble them up. Works great. And I don't waste anything that way. I need a teaspoon of oregano, a teaspoon of thyme, and my recipe calls for a teaspoon of sage, but sage is my absolutely favorite flavor, so I'm going to make it 1.5 teaspoons. Then we need salt, a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of ground black pepper. Now we're just going to mix it all together. And it doesn't look like much now, but when you mix it with your water and your butter, just like you would on a regular package of stovetop stuffing, you've got a great stuffing side dish for any time of the year. In the recipe that's going to be at the description, I'll also put how to mix it for the final product. This makes the equivalent of 2 boxes of stovetop stuffing. Now I'm going to put it all in one container, but you could easily divide it in half, about 3 cups per portion. Make sure when you get to the bottom where the spices have settled that you divide that out evenly between the 2 packages. You can store it in a Ziploc bag, you can store it in a jar, you can put it in the freezer for that matter. It stores on the pantry shelf just fine. The one thing about if you divide it into 2 portions, you don't have to worry about whether you're getting all the spices and herbs that you want. But I'll just dig around in there when I use it to make sure that I do. And there I have my stovetop stuffing ready to store in the pantry. It only took a couple minutes. To start off, in a medium-sized saucepan, place 1.5 cups of ketchup, 1 cup of brown sugar, 1/4 cup of molasses, 1/4 cup of plain water, and 1/4 cup of pineapple juice. Canned, fresh, doesn't matter. Spices, we have 2.5 teaspoons of ground mustard, 2 teaspoons of paprika, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and a pinch of cayenne. Last thing, you need 1 tablespoon of liquid smoke. Stir together all those ingredients in a medium pot over medium heat, bring it to a boil, then reduce the heat and simmer for 5 minutes until the sugar is well dissolved. After the 5 minutes, if you decide you want a thicker sauce, add a slurry of 1 tablespoon cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of cold water. Then simmer for up to 15 minutes until the desired thickness is reached. Keep in mind that it may thicken slightly more as it cools. Now you can use it immediately, or you can store it in the refrigerator. I like to store mine in old ketchup bottles, either plastic or glass. You can store your sauce in the refrigerator for up to a month, or if you want, you can actually freeze it. When ready to use, just thaw it in the fridge and use as much as needed. I hope you give this recipe a try and like it as much as I do. We'll start out with 6 ounces of lemon jello and add 2 cups of boiling water. Just stir it until it dissolves. Now we're just going to set that aside on the counter while we get our dish ready. I have a 9 by 13 dish and I've greased it. You can grease it normally or use a spray oil. Now we'll make the crust for it. It's just a normal graham cracker crust. Got 3 cups of graham cracker crumbs. It's a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar and a 1/2 cup of melted butter. And we want to just mix it all together. Once it's all mixed, we're going to put half of it in our prepared dish and the other half we're going to save for the topping. I'm just pressing it down into the bottom to make our crust so that it holds together. And we're not going to be baking this crust. We're going to be putting it in our freezer and let it sit there until we get the rest of the cheesecake put together. Now I have a 17-ounce can of evaporated milk, not sweetened condensed milk, evaporated milk. And I'm going to beat it until it reaches stiff peaks. The milk needs to be cold. And there we go, it got nice peaks. I'm going to set that aside. I have 16 ounces of softened cream cheese. And we want to whip this up until it's nice and smooth and creamy. Now that it's creamy, we're going to add 1 1/4 cups of granulated sugar and mix that together. Now we'll slowly add the jello mixture and stir it until it's well combined. Now we're going to add a 1/4 cup of fresh lemon juice and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Give it a little mix. Now we're going to fold in our evaporated milk. When you're folding it, you can see how light and airy this is going to be. It's not the same texture as your normal cheesecake. Now once it's all well combined, we're going to take our crust back out of the freezer and pour this on top. So we have our crust out of the freezer and we're going to pour this in. It's not going to look like it can hold it all because it's going to come right to the very edge. And if you can't get it to hold it all, put it in a separate little container. You've got a little individual cheesecake then. Now we're going to sprinkle our reserved graham cracker mix over the top. Now we're just going to cover it and then put it in the fridge overnight. And then tomorrow you can just slice and serve. And we'll be back tomorrow and I'll show you how it looks.